Welcome to Read Poems Every Day. I'm really excited about today's video because I get to talk about counting beans. Bean counting. This is the second step in my process of slowly getting to know a poem. It follows the first step, which my previous video covered, reading a poem out loud. And what I like so much about this step is that it forces a reader to slow down and to make lists, which I love. And it also gets them to forgive themselves for not immediately understanding the poem, and it gives you something concrete to do. It also jumpstarts the process of just note taking, taking notes about a poem. And it seems to me once you accrue some notes, this is also a perfect way to then transition into observations about things that other readers might consider more important, right? Like the form of the poem, figures of speech, images, word choice. But before we get to any of that, we just have to do some counting. So here are my notes, my bean counting notes about Sylvia Plath's Morning Song, and then I'm going to go on to the Tennyson poem that I also read and spoke about in a couple other previous videos, and model for you how I go about taking those notes and walking you through the process I do it. I'm not going to do that for all four of the poems that have been my examples over the past few videos, just going to do Tennyson. But first off, here are my Plath notes. Sylvia Plath's poem is made up of 6 stanzas. They are all 3 lines long, meaning they are all tercets, which means that the poem is 18 lines long. Don't be confused by these hanging indents here. This has to do with the size of the screen. So see if I make the text smaller, those lines even out into one line. Sometimes when you're counting lines, you have to be really careful not to count the continuation of a line onto an indented line as another line. I hope that made sense. That probably was a little redundant, but anyway. So consistent lineation and organization into stanzas throughout. The next thing I did in my notes is I tracked and just listed all the instances of enjambment in the poem. I've also highlighted them here so you can see them. Enjambment, for those who might need a refresher, is the name that critics and poets give to the effect at the end of a line where there is no punctuation, and yet where the sentence level or prose level sense spills over from one line to the next. And so what that does is it makes the reader be a bit of a visual gymnast. And so here in the third tercet, which I love, this is one of my favorite moments in the history of poetry. Plath, at the only time in the poem, uses enjambments for both the first and the second line of the stanza. I'm no more your mother than the cloud that distills a mirror to reflect its own slow effacement at the wind's hand. One breath, no pause at the end of a line, unlike line 1, unlike line 3, unlike line 4, anyway, so on and so forth. Although this line 4, if you're familiar with textual variants, there is evidence, and pretty good evidence. For instance, Sylvia Plath's TypeScript, that this line is actually supposed to be enjambed. It's supposed to read "New statue in a drafty museum," and yet when it was published after Plath died, um, I think Ted Hughes introduced a period here. Although I'm not a Plath scholar, so I'm going to stop talking about that before I get myself into some trouble. Um, the one instance of enjambment that is sometimes easy to miss is actually one that crosses 2 stanzas. So you can see this. I've indicated it here, where across lines 15 and 16, you also don't pause. But aside from stanza 5, every other stanza ends in a hard stop with a full stop, a period, right? Took its place among the elements. We stand round blankly as walls. effacement at the wind's hand, a far sea moves in my ear, the clear vowels rise like balloons, except here, the window square whitens and swallows its dull stars, so the sentence crosses the stanza break. You might be wondering, why does that matter? And when we're bean counting, we're not yet worried about that. We're just trying to continue to develop a kind of interface with the poem, a familiarity with its concrete details. I tend not to be someone who pays a lot of attention to meter in a poem, like in the sense of counting out the patterns of stressed and unstressed syllables. But one thing I do like to just check on is the degree to which the line length varies. Is this a poem where you'll have, as in the case of Brood, a one word line followed by a line that is several syllables long? Is there wide variation? In Plath's poem, there's some variation. The line length is variable, but does sort of swing within a sort of short range of syllable counting. Um, I also track punctuation. There's, mostly periods and commas here, but you do in line 11 get a colon. I wake to listen, colon, a far sea moves in my ear. You also get a semicolon at the very near the very end of the poem. And now you, the baby, try your handful of notes. The clear vowels rise like balloons, and a few other instances. But it's really when we start to track pronouns that you start to feel all that concrete detail is now in your head. You're now sort of familiar with some of the movement of the poem. But now when you start to track pronouns, that's when the situation starts to open up, because you track that. I mean, you have the your handful of notes here. Now you try right here, but all the way up to line 1, love set you going like a fat gold watch. Um, but then also, what's so interesting about the third stanza is that's the first time the first person singular pronoun is used. We have plural personal pronouns in stanza 2, our, we, but it's not till stanza 3 that we get the I. And so, what's so interesting then about that is that the poem initially seems to be about being a new parent, a new mother, being responsible for this new human being who's just been born, and yet, before we even get to the mother saying "I," the experience seems oddly communal. Odd, not I mean not oddly communal if you've had children or um, are part of a big family. But I think what's compelling and what the poem starts to get us to think about is that there's a wider sort of familial and social context for any given mother-child relationship, although that dissipates pretty quickly as we move into the second half of the poem. Now, notice I've started to maybe start to tread a little bit onto interpretive or evaluative comments about the poem, but all of that is anchored in a knowledge of how the pronouns are deployed in the poem. That we have the you early on, we have the plural personal pronouns in stanza 2, we shift to the first person singular in stanza 3, and that carries to the end of the poem with the second person address, meaning the address to the infant. All right, so that's bean counting. That's counting beans in Sylvia Plath's Morning Song. Now, to do a bit of a live demonstration of how this works, we're going to look at Tennyson's In Memoriam, and we're going to count some beans here. So section 3 of In Memoriam is 4 stanzas long, 4 stanzas. As I think I spoke about in a previous video, these In Memoriam stanzas are all 4 lines long. And so that means there's 16 lines total. So that's that. Okay. Now, what else do I talk about? All right. So, as you can see, just glancing at the first two stanzas, there are no instances of enjambment here. Tennyson Tennyson always gives us a pause at the end and always has a pretty careful control over the rhythm of it, giving us lots of places to pause and take a breath. However, no, actually, no enjambment. So that's also just really interesting. So there's no enjambment at all. Fellowship, death, breath, lip, run, sky, cry, sun, stands, tone, own, hands, blind, good, blood, mind. We take a pause at each of those line endings. So very different from Morning Song, where Plath introduces several instances of enjambment. So no enjambment there. Line length. Line length is consistent because it, again, as an in memoriam stanza, Tennyson is working toward a specific meter. They are all about the same length. We can count them out. Oh sorrow, cruel fellowship, right? They are 7 to 8 beats, right? 7 to 8 beats. Oh priestess in the vaults of death, oh sweet, and bid her in a breath. So all 8 beats. What whispers from thy lying lip? 8 beats. So consistently 8 beats throughout. Now, there might be some moments where in modern English we need to fudge or elongate a word. Oh, sorrow, cruel fellowship, right? Oh, sorrow, cruel fellowship. Like I want to say cruel in one syllable, where it makes you wonder if it's supposed to be two. Anyway, there is over a century and a half separating me from Tennyson, almost 2 centuries separating me from Tennyson writing this poem after all. Okay, so line length, consistently 8 beats. What else do I pay attention to? Punctuation. So punctuation, we of course have lots of commas. We have a question. So in line 4, we have a question. Do we have a question anywhere else? And line 16. Let me move my face here. Up there. So we have commas. We have questions. We actually don't have that many periods. I think we just have one period in the whole poem, which I am now just realizing. I mean, what that means, what that helps us start to understand then is that the first stanza is one question. It's one sentence, in other words. Whereas the second two stanzas are one sentence. We'll see how there's several independent clauses, but or at least more than two here, but one sentence. And then the final stanza is a sentence. So that means we have 3 sentences. I know that's not an observation necessarily about punctuation, but it's related. So I'd probably just have a note there. 3 sentences. We have dashes. Dashes. Where? Just in that third stanza. So lines 9 and 11. Then we have semicolons. And this is how Tennyson's able to kind of elongate his sentence in actually 3 of the 4 stanzas. So in stanza 1, we just have commas and a question mark, but we have semicolons in lines 5, 6, and line 14. I might have missed a couple there. Apologies if you're yelling at the screen. And then we have a colon in line 8. And it's the colon that fuses stanzas 2 and 3 together into one statement of sorrow. Right? The stars, she whispers, the she here is sorrow, the feeling the speaker is experiencing and personifying as a way to sort of stage stage a kind of battle with emotion and grief, a kind of mental battle, also a battle, as he posits in the final stanza, between reason and sorrow to some degree. The stars, she whispers, blindly run. A web is woven across the sky. From out waste places comes a cry and murmurs from the dying sun. Colon. So we'd have to think a bit about what's that colon indicating to us about the transition from stanza 2 to 3. Maybe it's not indicating anything. It's just establishing a continuation of the thought. I'm not sure. And all the phantom nature stands, with all the music in her tone, a hollow echo of my own, a hollow form with empty hands. And then note the quotation mark closes that up. So the last thing there would be quotation marks in lines 5, 9, and 12. Okay. So as you can see, there's no enjambment. There's no enchantment. When there's no enjambment, that usually indicates a punctuation heavy poem, right? And as a reader, you have to pay very close attention to how that punctuation is shaping and shepherding you through the lines of the poem. Whereas, in Morning Song, you get that this third tercet, and you are at the mercy of the words, the line ending, the just the bare rhythm of the sentence, to try to get a sense of how to move through it. And because it's jammed, you don't get a chance to take a breath, to pause, to scan ahead either, right? So it's the reading experience is very different. I mean, Donna Kelly's poem. I'm not gonna demonstrate this in sort of in a live fashion, the beat and counting we do here. But I think one thing you note immediately is you might be able to count the lines, but can you count the stanzas? Is stanza even a word organizational term that makes any sense with respect to Brood? Anyway, that's an open question. We'd have to think about it. All right, back to Tennyson then. I do want to add, you've probably noticed I'm using using some software here embedded into my Chrome browser. This is Hypothesis. I don't know if I'll always be using it, but for now it's an easy way to show my notes side by side with the poem itself. Okay, so we've done some counting. We scanned for enjambment. We checked in on the line length. We inventoried the punctuation and have said some things about also the sentence organization. But what about pronouns? Right. So we have thy in line 4. So thy refers to sorrow. So sorrow being directly addressed. O sorrow, cruel fellowship. O priestess in the vaults of death. O sweet and bitter in a breath, what whispers from thy lying lip? I guess what is kind of a pronoun there too. Perhaps, although I'm going to leave that one alone for now, because maybe not as important as thinking about the personal pronouns here. But then we shift from second person address in stanza 1 to third person she. This is also sorrow. That's line 5. The stars, she whispers, blindly run. Here we go. From out waste places comes a cry, and all the phantom nature stands. So her is used in line 10. But here, the her is not sorrow, but nature. Okay. And then my, which is tricky, is sorrow. Note the my here is not the speaker. The my exists within quotation marks, so it's being attributed by the poem to this quotation, this piece of dialogue, which is attributed to sorrow. So, and that is line 11. And then we have I. And this is the speaker in line 13. And then we have her. Again, this is sorrow, I believe. Lines 14 and 15. And I think that's it. So note even something as simple as tracking pronouns in a 16-line poem, a relatively simple poem on first blush, actually requires a little bit of navigation and a little bit of thought. So something that started as low stakes actually raises, I wouldn't say interpretive questions, but meaningful questions that, again, as with Plath, plugs you into the situation of the poem and gets you thinking about who's talking and who's not. And as soon as you're thinking about the situation, you're anticipating the next phase of my process, which is sound and sense. Sound and sense. All right, but I'll save that for a future video. I think I've gone on long enough about bean counting. I'm going to post that. And here are my new notes about Tennyson, section 3 of Tennyson's In Memoriam. Thanks for counting some beans with me today. Let's read some more poetry tomorrow.